Sunday School teacher, I'm glad that you have joined us for our time of study and preparation. I'm Tim Smith with Sunday School University, and let's do this. Let's get our Bible, let's get our notes, get us a pen, and let's get together and study God's Word to prepare to teach this coming Sunday. The lesson that we're working on is the lesson for Sunday, November the 7th. The title of this lesson is The Gospel's Freedom. The Gospel's Freedom. We're continuing in our study in the book of Colossians. We're still in chapter 2. We're going to be looking at verses 16 through 23. The point of this lesson, what we want them walking away with at the end of our study is this. The gospel gives believers the freedom to live a God-honoring life. The gospel gives believers the freedom to live a God-honoring life. In this session, Paul directly confronts the false doctrines of these false teachers who had come into this church, and he begins to list their activities that they were advocating, and he gave reasons why those activities would not accomplish what those teachers promised. Today we often face people arguing that behaviors directly condemned in the Bible should be accepted under the pretense that people are different today and that there are no absolutes. I mean, we're dealing with that in the church today. It's amazing. Just a few weeks ago, read a study from one of our colleges and seminaries that worked with a national survey of evangelical Christians. And the majority of evangelical Christians in this study did not believe that Jesus was the only way to heaven. We've let the world impact our doctrine. So we need to be confronting these false teachers just as Paul confronted these false teachers. Now, it is seldom easy, but the church needs to learn from Paul the necessity of confronting sin as sin. It is easy to let situations like that slide because it is difficult. So many times under the pretense of keeping the peace in the church, we don't want to cause trouble. We want to keep the peace. Because of that, we're tempted to ignore the unbiblical teaching or behaviors. It's easy to conclude that what they are teaching is their opinion. And you know, in America, everybody's entitled to their opinion, so what's the harm? Sometimes you may even hear people argue that those people have their truth and I have my truth, as though truth can change depending upon the circumstances. Well, Paul addresses these false teachers, and hopefully we understand that as well. The practices being advocated by these false teachers had the appearance of wisdom, but they were temporal, not eternal. They were human commands, not from God. So let's look at these. Beginning in verses 16 and 17, there we see freedom in worship. Paul says, "Therefore, don't let anyone judge you in regard to food or drink, or in the matter of a festival or a new moon or a Sabbath day. These are a shadow of what was to come. The substance is Christ." So here Paul begins in verse 16. He begins by saying, therefore. The therefore connects Paul's desire for this church not to be taken captive by false doctrine. Last week we talked about that. We see that in the first 15 verses of chapter 2 about these false teachers. And he's saying, don't be captive by these false teachers. And so he begins in verse 16 by don't being led astray or with this idea of in regard to food and drink. He's talking about what they ate and drank. He goes on to say about the festivals, the new moon, the Sabbath. That's a summary list of Jewish ritual worship. And so here in verse 16, what Paul is saying, the early church dealt with the issue of whether Gentile believers had to observe the practices of Judaism. Now, there'll be some people look at that and say, don't let